in that piece, he really starts with Senator Tom Cotton, who I'm not a big fan of, but he was raising red flags early on and raising the possibility that it could have been a lab leak. And he was doing it in what were relatively measured terms. You know, he tried to play into like some of the China fear and all of that to try to get President Trump to take it more seriously and be more critical of China at a time when he was actually giving President Xi all kinds of credit and praise.
My friend.
Yes, my friend, President Xi, all that stuff, right? So the media took Cotton's comments, which were somewhat inflammatory, but didn't actually go all the way out and say this was like an intentional bioweapon or anything like that. They somewhat mischaracterized it. Cotton responded in a very inflammatory way. Then all these inflammatory social media posts get written up as if they're news. And that insinuation that it was an intentionally released bioweapon, that gets debunked, even though that's not actually what he was saying in the beginning. And then the fact that the false claim was debunked was used to also debunk the thing that he actually was saying, which is that, hey, we should look into whether this is. So it's just this like hell circle of media telephone, debunking the claim that he didn't make and using that to debunk the claim that he was actually making, even though that claim hadn't been debunked. And that's really the origins of this. And the other piece of this that continues to stick with it is the moment that this was branded as a Trump theory and as a racist theory, then it was taken off the table from the media. And this is what I've been saying. We can throw this up on the screen from Glenn Greenwald. This is what I've been saying all along. How is it more racist to look into like, hey, maybe it came out of a lab than what everybody was doing, speculating about like, oh, Chinese people eat weird things, they eat bats, and that's so weird and gross. Like, how is that? How is the lab thing more racist than the Chinese people eat all kinds of weird shit and ooh, gross, and we don't understand them? That seems patently more racist to me. And so what he's pointing out there is the New York Times reporter who focuses on COVID.
On COVID.
Okay, she basically said just this week that the lab leak theory is racist, and so we shouldn't take it seriously. Let's throw this next tweet up on the screen. So you can see here her tweet. She says, someday we will stop talking about the lab leak theory and maybe even admit its racist roots, but alas, that day is not yet here. Again.
That was yesterday, by the way, just so everybody knows.
All we want here is to know the truth. This isn't about any sort of racial implication. In fact, what we do know now is that the U.S. government may have been complicit in funding some of this research. So this isn't about smearing China or certainly Chinese people. It's just about wanting to know the truth. And the fact that someone who is working on COVID at the New York Times is using this to color and addle her thinking and put something off the table that shouldn't have been put off the table is incredibly revealing. Now, after a lot of pushback, I think from her own colleagues too, who are probably like, we're looking into this theory as well now, and not because we're racist Trump supporters. She took those tweets down, which she said were poorly phrased or something like that.
She can say whatever she wants.
Very revealing incident here.
She put the quiet part out loud. She admitted it. She admitted she still believes it's racist. Now, as you say, is it not more racist to say that eating pangolin bats is a common practice in China?
This was a really good explanation of my observations of what's really been happening. I think she really put it in a very succinct and very clear way. And the reality is that this is still happening. I still see people online who are still talking about crazy, wacky conspiracy theories rather than what's actually being seriously discussed. This is yet another example of where some of these wacky conspiracy theorists, and I want to be clear, I am clarifying the type of conspiracy theorists, because simply being a conspiracy theorist is not a bad thing. Right? Conspiracies are a thing. To theorize about them is a thing. But you can also have a really bad theory that's not really based on a lot of evidence and just kind of, you take an inch and then you go a mile. For example, you look at a situation like this and you say, it's probably a weapon. And then you don't even say probably. You say it as a fact. The Chinese were something, blah, 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 blah. How do you know that? It's obvious, right? That's a crazy conspiracy theory. You're going to look at this situation and with no clear evidence leading towards any kind of weaponization, you're going to jump to that and say it as fact. right? And because you want to push that narrative, then you're going to go and do research into things that support that rather than actually investigate the actual thing that happened, right? So you want to go on this weaponization thing, so then you start Googling about China and their history on bioweapons or whatever, and like, look, China's been doing this for a long time and blah, 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 blah. And that there is truth to that. They do have a history with that. So it's not crazy to think that the Communist Party might have had certain intentions in terms of weaponization, and they might have been doing something, but we have no evidence to indicate that. That would be pure speculation. Now, to suggest that it might have come from a lab, that is a logical leap. That is a logical theory that's based on good evidence, right? Some people don't understand what a theory means, right? They say that the problem with the crazy theories is that they don't have any evidence. Like, people who are still trying to say it's not, the lab leak thing is still nonsense. They say it's ridiculous to suggest that because we don't have any evidence. So now they don't have a clear understanding of what the word evidence means. There are different qualities of evidence. If a murder is committed and I can prove that you were across the street within 10 minutes of the murder, that is factually evidence that supports the possibility that you might have killed someone. Now, obviously, that evidence in a vacuum is nowhere near enough. You need a lot more evidence than that, but that is still evidence. When you look at a case, it's typically not going to just be one thing, right? Unless it's a video of you doing the crime, right? It's going to be a series of things. But have you not seen a case where they use proximity to the crime as evidence that you did it? Again, they won't use that alone, but that will be one of the things. You had a beef with the person. You recently purchased a weapon shortly before the crime was committed. You, in your text messages, you had this message where it seems like you were talking about you might want to do something to them, right? You also were seen running down the block very suspiciously. And we have confirmation that you were across the street within 5 minutes of the crime. Like, it's a series of things, right? And then when we asked you about your alibi, you lied. You said you were actually in another town, and we can confirm you actually weren't in the other town, so why would you lie about it? But again, one of the pieces of evidence is your proximity to the crime, right? So with that being said, we certainly have evidence that this came from a lab. We do not have anywhere near enough evidence to conclusively determine whether it came from the lab or not. But to say that we don't have evidence is to deny the evidence. 2 people diagnosed with COVID-like symptoms, I believe a couple months before we even had any reports about this outbreak. 2 people who I believe worked in the actual lab, the Wuhan Lab. That is evidence that it came from the lab. Not conclusive evidence. That alone is not conclusive enough to say it definitely came from there. Now, a wacky conspiracy theorist would use that alone and say definitively that it came from the lab. Look, these 2 scientists, whatever, right? And if you want to mislead, you'll focus on the wacky theories. You'll focus on the wacky people out there that are taking whatever they can find and just jump into conclusions. You can focus on them and say these guys are crazy and use that as a way to run away from the people who actually have sensible, logical, feasible theories. 2 people from the lab, 2 months before the outbreak, had COVID-like symptoms. The very first person that was diagnosed publicly, official COVID case, 3 hours drive from the lab. We look at the type of research the lab was doing, right? We look at how the investigation was done, the conflicts of interests. We look at the extreme level of effort to dismiss the lab leak theory. A lot of effort, big campaign. Oh, it's crazy theory. It's nonsense. Oh, there's nothing to it. Oh, that's just racism. Oh, this is right wingers. Right? And the list goes on and on and on. I have a series of facts which indicate a probability that it might have come from the lab. I don't have as much evidence to support the natural origins. Now, if someone has more data supporting the natural origins theories, please present it. But most of what I'm seeing is pointing in one particular direction. But again, a big part of this problem has been you got these crazy people out there who come up with their wacky theories and they talk about weaponization and Chinese people killing their own people and saying stuff factually that you're not even sure about. You're just assuming. And then you have mainstream media focusing on those crazy theories and saying, oh, it's conspiracy theory, and then completely ignoring what the rational people are saying, whether they're scientists or they're just citizens who are just thinking for themselves and not going with the mainstream narrative, looking at, hey, some things don't really make sense here. And with that, I want to be very clear. I don't know where this thing came from. We do not have enough evidence to be conclusive about where it came from, one way or the other. But I'm 100% sure that we have not put in enough effort and not taking seriously enough the potential of the lab leak theory, which is very, very feasible. And from all the evidence I've seen, it seems more than a small level of probability. I'm not going to put a number on it. I don't have enough data to be able to put a specific number on it, but I don't think it's small, right? Especially when all the information coming out. Because think about it. The people, so you have a group of people who've been pushing this thing about natural origins, yet they're not really providing us much evidence to support that. Now you look at the people who talk about the lab leak theory, and the list of evidence is just growing and growing and growing. One of the scientists in the lab indicated early on that they had concerns that it came from the lab, right? Gain of function research was banned for fear of exactly what happened in terms of not necessarily it came from a lab, but the having a pandemic, right? The research was banned because if it escaped from a lab, it could cause exactly what happened. Add that to the list of evidence that supports the potential of a lab leak. Add to that the fact that we've had more than a few lab leaks. That's been a problem, right? General public isn't aware. I wasn't aware until I did my research, but that's a problem. We've had more than a few lab leaks, right? That was something that they were dealing with and working with, and people were complaining about. It's just like the nuclear stuff. A lot of people don't know how close many times we had accidental nuclear launches. A lot of times these things happen and you don't even know about it. So again, it is very clear, without a doubt, that enough has not been done to investigate the lab leak theory. It hasn't been taken seriously. Our government has failed us in that regard. Dr. Fauci has failed us in that regard. The WHO has failed us in that regard. So even if it didn't come from a lab, this has still been a massive failure of multiple institutions. And it's an absolute disgrace. And if you are sitting there wondering, this is another part of the problem, wondering why this even matters. If you put aside your partisanship, the very thing that a certain moron who I do not like said was a very valid point. This is not going to be the last pandemic. What happens if next time it has a 5% mortality rate and we look at millions of people dead? Look at the destruction that this virus caused. Over 600,000 people dead in this country alone. Think about the devastation of something that is 4 to 10 times as deadly. Think about what that would do to this country. Look at what happened in the last year in this country, to the economy, to our lives. Imagine something happening 4 to 10 times worse. I understand the desire to move on from this. It's been a tough year, but history, when forgotten, is bound to repeat itself. We must learn from this and do better next time. And there will be a next time. This is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well. Shout out to Alan, Lindsay, Pascal Show, Enemy Nation, Harry Nack, wherever he is. Until next time.